I think the most fulfilling part so far has been the clearance process. Um, I never thought we would get to where we are today in this clearance process. And what I mean by that is the business of being a student, right? Clearing the way so that obstacles, filling out paperwork and the money and the paying the bills is kind of all out of the way before students start classes.
Yeah, I think for so long we've had it a little bit easy in terms of we haven't had to articulate perfectly the value proposition that we provide because everybody just kind of understood it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for sure we're in a place now where we've got to shore up what we are telling students we're providing for them, because it isn't just like, oh, we're preparing you for a job, right? There is a lot of other benefits for a young adult to be on campuses. VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources. You've joined us for another episode of Cap and Gown. Welcome. I am joined today by Matt Boisvert, our president. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel. Great to join you today.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be here for long.
You're just going to help me with State of the Union. A couple of things I would like for us to talk about before we get into State of the Union, though. First of all, remember, if you are watching us on YouTube, to subscribe to our channel. If you are following us on LinkedIn, or if you're watching us on LinkedIn, you should follow us on LinkedIn. It might not be Tuesday for you when you listen to this because you may be listening to it wherever you get your podcast. So thank you for taking time out to spend with us. If you want to give us a rating, a good rating, that would be great. Matt, it is my favorite time of the year.
Yes.
If you have been listening to us for any amount of time, you will know that I have a sacred connection with red buds. Red buds are the harbinger of spring. They are purple, so I don't know why they're called red buds, but they're the very first trees to tell you spring is around the corner. And maybe someday I will tell the whole red bud story, but I just want you to know this is Red Bud Week. It started, Red Bud Day was last Monday when we first started to see them, and they are in full bloom. In fact, this is what I have on my desk that I stare at all the time. This is a red bud flower, and it is the best time to be living in Texas right now. This month is perfect. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, it is fun when spring comes. It is really nice weather.
Yeah.
Also, what do they call it? Super Tuesday?
Today
it's kind of a voting day.
For sure.
A lot going on.
Okay, so I do want to talk about State of the Union, but you have remember our theme of the year, you guys, is curiosity. I think I said this last week, but we have a bunch of new listeners. So let me just remind you of the format of the way we do Cap and Gown. Matt and I chit chat for about 4 minutes, and we talk about the theme of the year, which is curiosity. Then we do State of the Union, where I do about 20 minutes of what's happening in higher education. And then we welcome our guest. Very excited about our guest today. But will you start our chit chat with some curiosity facts?
All right. And just a reminder, so we had a great book for Joy. This book I decided to pick up for curiosity. This is by National Geographic for kids, but that's okay. It's called Brain Candy. I'm learning a lot as I go through it. And the theme for today's Brain Candy, Rachel, is words. I know how you love words.
I do love words.
All right. Things you may not have known. It has been estimated that a new word is created every 98 minutes.
Okay, well, in my house, it's like every 2 minutes because I make a word all the time.
Right. Webster once published a dictionary accidentally featuring the made-up word "dord," like D-O-R-D.
Okay.
It's not a real word. They put it in the dictionary. It is now Dord.
It's in the dictionary.
3 words that don't rhyme with any other English word, although
Orange.
Eminem may have a quarrel with this, but no, these are the 3 words: month, purple, and walrus.
Okay.
Try and rhyme
gonna-
those. Month.
Okay.
Last word, swims, is still swims even when you turn it upside down.
Oh, that's nice. That's
Yeah.
like the guy who got his PhD in palindromes and now they call him Dr. Awkward. Figure that one out. That's a good one. Okay. I want you, do you know why that's funny?
No.
Because Dr. Awkward is a palindrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. Very briefly, here's another look into Rachel and Matt's brain. The last 4 things that I have Googled: spider balloon web. Spiders can travel thousands of miles by putting up silk in the air and letting the wind blow them. iPhone journaling, which I don't know if you've heard about this big debacle. It's not really a debacle. But in this latest iPhone release, they created something called journaling, which turns on it's kind of like AirDrop. But everyone freaked out because they're like, now we're sharing where we are all the time with everyone. Google it. It's a whole big thing. Who can get into Aspire Lounge in the airport? Because I was just traveling. The answer is not me. And Abyssinian, which is Ethiopian. But I found out there's a cat, Abyssinian cats, that are more like dogs. They're very friendly and they like people. So those are my 4 searches. Okay, You have 1 minute.
Okay. New Zealand visas.
Okay.
Just curious. Viva and I were having a conversation about her friend who went to New Zealand. And apparently, if you're 30 or younger, you can easily get a visa to work in New Zealand. Airplane doors close time.
Okay.
Because it's like, is it 10 minutes or 15 minutes? And it really matters if you're in a hurry or if you're trying to make a connection. The Panhandle fire, which thinking about 1.1 million acres that have been burning. And then Roman Emperor Nero.
Okay, there you go. There is what's going on in our brain. Let's talk about the State of the Union. All right, I know we're all sick of FAFSA, but listen, there's a really, really good article in Inside Higher Ed that is called How Ambitious Plans for a New FAFSA Ended in Fiasco. And what I appreciate about it is it takes us through the entire journey, starting in December 2020, which is when the FAFSA overhaul started. So Congress passed the FAFSA Simplification Act. Everyone was like, this is a great idea. We've got 2 years to get it rolled out. October 2022 is when they were supposed to do it. Then they appointed a new education secretary in March of 2021. And he's like, hey, I need more time. And they're like, that's okay. We'll give you another year. We're going to give you all the way until January 1st of 2024. He was like, okay. However, you'll recall that this is the same group that then had to give out COVID money to all K-12s and nonprofits and higher education institutions. So they were a little distracted. They had some other things on their plate, but this is a $336 million project that they decided on implementing. And it was the Office of Federal Student Aid who's in charge of rolling that out. They also were in the middle of a gigantic project to modernize the loan servicing system. So they were underfunded and distracted. Also, I want to point out, Matt, you and I were talking about this earlier, but this is like they wanted to update the formula for how they were giving FAFSA, right? They wanted to make it easier and they wanted to update the formula. Somebody was like, hey, we also have a problem because it's literally running on an IBM mainframe. Written in Cobalt, which no one has written in 40 years.
Right.
If we're going to update this thing, maybe we should do that as well, which was really their downfall. They gave the contract to a developer group. It was a $121 million contract. And then we had a lot of trouble. 2 things that I think are entertaining. First of all, they had until July 1st, 2024 to roll it out. They rolled it out 2 days early on December 30th for 30 minutes so that they could say that they'd done what they needed to, and then they closed it. So they're like, it's rolled out. Not really. Nobody can actually fill it out to the middle of January. And then remember, in fact, I think Andrea, who's our guest, when we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, they just said, hey, you guys aren't going to get this information for FAFSA until March. And now we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
So if you want to read about the whole mess, that is a great article to just understand what happened over the last 4 years, really.
And I think what's terrible is that the number of completions is so way down.
Yeah,
It's
what
like-
did I tell you? It's like 5 million, and usually it's
25 million. I mean, it's
18 million. 5 million currently, and usually it's 18 million. So it's a wreck.
Yeah.
Okay. I would encourage you also, there's the new presidential survey, the 2024 presidential survey, where 380 presidents from 206 public and 175 private institutions are surveyed. It's run by Hanover's Research. So the article that I'm linking here has a review of all of it, but you can also download the entire report if you want to dig into it. I think it's worth reading. This is the first year that they've asked about AI. So presidents have some things to say about AI. They talk about the election outlook. So the presidents are a little bit anxious about, it's not even like one side or another. It's just like, who knows what's going to happen depending on who our president is going to be. The state of campus speech, the presidents talk a little bit about that. Race on campus. This is interesting. 83% of presidents who responded rated the state of race relations at their institution campus as good or excellent, up from 78% last year. So that's pretty interesting. Public confidence, they cover in the survey, financial stability, mergers and closures. So if you just want to have like an overview of all of the things that your president are thinking about and how that fits kind of in the general, what is that like how all presidents are thinking about it versus how you're thinking about it, could be interesting for you to read that survey. Also an article. Did you have something you want to say about that?
No, I do think I just think it's really interesting. It would be to compare what your president thinks with what the general consensus is.
Yep. Another article I have for you is about how college professors are using generative AI to teach. I don't think there's anything super meaty in this article, but I did want to tell you, I have just learned that you can use AI to prepare your slide decks. Did you know this?
Only because you told me.
Magic Slides is an extension for Google Slides where you can go in and be like, here's the topic and here's the Wikipedia page. And then it just puts it into a presentation, like does your layout, your format, takes all of the words, puts it in bullet points for it. What?
I know. And
it's incredible.
I know. It is. I'm doing a little self-soothing.
You're very good at slides.
Because I love building slides. I love the design of a slide, being able to use your brain to like, how do I tell this story and connect with the audience? And so.
But listen, this article cautions, this is the sentence at the end of it, which I think is hilarious. It says, remember, so understand limitations. AI is not free from bias and sometimes hallucinates. So you have to teach students the shortcomings of those tools, right? So the two main things that we keep saying over and over again are the ethics of AI and then the fact that it hallucinates sometimes and you got to be real careful because it sounds confident. No, doesn't always talking about sometimes. Okay. Also, we've talked about this in the past, but remember the College Cost Reduction Act, which, spoiler alert, doesn't have bipartisan support. It's not going to get passed, most likely. It's like 224 pages of this bill, which is supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years. It hasn't been reauthorized since 2008. They just keep being like, okay, well, we're going to make it do this time. Like, it's not a comprehensive bill. But I like it because there's some really interesting ideas. So Democrats obviously want to reduce the cost of higher education. Republicans have in this bill that they want to limit the amount students can take out for undergraduate. So they can only take out $50,000 to be able to support their undergraduate work, and then $100,000 for higher level courses. So it's really interesting. Obviously, a lot of debate around that.
Yeah.
But you remember we also talked about their sort of suggestion that schools would be on the hook for paying their graduates' loans back if students don't end up earning as much money as the college predicted. So if we recruit you and we say with this degree you can earn this amount of money, and then you don't earn that amount of money, the college is actually on the hook to be able to pay back your loan. So for example, if this went into play, which again, spoiler alert, right? But if it went into play, the University of Southern California would risk a roughly $170 million annual penalty.
Wow.
The University of Phoenix would face $10 million every year. So pretty interesting. I like talking about these things, right? Like, let's think about if we were going to solve this, what are some ideas? And then let's just continue to refine them and make them better.
I agree. And that's where my brain went. I'm really curious. It would be interesting game theory. Like, so you put a bunch of university presidents in a room and you say, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And see how they like, do you kind of lowball, kind of sandbag, like, oh, well, when you graduate, do you do that? Well, you can't really, because you've got your competitors, right? So there's a little bit of a, this is a great exercise for game theory.
Yeah. And the Cobra effect, which remember is when you start tweaking things, you never know what's going to happen. Yeah.
Unintended incentives.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you know, but today is a really big day in the student athlete world, because the National Labor Relations Board told Dartmouth basketball players that they could vote to be part of a union because they're now could be considered employees of Dartmouth. Remember, Dartmouth is a Division III school. They don't give out scholarships. Today, in fact, it may have happened in the last hour or so.
I'm looking it up.
Okay. So the players
voted 59 minutes ago, they voted to form.
Okay. So they've now voted to join a union. So let me tell you what that means. Okay. One thing is that the fact that the courts have ruled that Dartmouth students who don't get scholarships and are not like a big like championship game school, the fact that they can be considered employees because the school exerts enough control over them to make them able to be counted as employees means that some of those other gigantic schools who are giving out scholarships and are taking their athletics in a much more serious way, it provides them the language to be able to say, if those students are considered employees, then these students should be considered employees as well. And let me clarify, the schools wouldn't say that, the students would say that, right? Because the schools don't want to go in that direction. So if Dartmouth recognizes these students as part of the union, then there's one path. If they refuse to recognize them, then the entire National Labor Relations Board has to do a hearing, and then they'll decide what they're going to do. If Dartmouth says, yes, okay, we understand what you're saying, they could still go to federal court. So they could say, like, we're not going to rest on this decision. We're going to take this further. Dartmouth students want to be paid $20 an hour, which obviously is a really big problem because any school that's competing for student athletes has to either pay their students $20 an hour and whatever incentives you have to give your employees, right? Or they can be like, we don't have anything to do with them. We're kicking them out of we're not going to compete with them, Dartmouth, because we don't want to be held to that standard. Also, remember, this only extends to private institutions like the Ivy and some of the Power 5 athletic programs like Northwestern, South Carolina. Like, it's not that big of a deal in terms of most of our schools, except that the idea of student athlete versus employee is a gigantic problem for our schools, right? We just can't afford it.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack, and we'll see more of this in the next few months as you start looking at what how many schools could actually afford to pay their players beyond scholarships, right?
And Matt, especially if you get unions involved, I mean, that's a totally different thing. Then it's not just we want to pay our players. It's at this rate, you have to provide these things. These are the rules around how much you can work them. And right, it just opens up a can of worms.
So Dartmouth administrators in this latest update, they have 5 days to file an objection to the vote, which, by the way, was not unanimous. It was 13-2.
Which is pretty interesting because, like, last semester, all 15 of the students applied to the labor union and said, we want to join your union. So there's been a little bit of change there. It's not unanimous anymore. One of the suggestions in this article is that Dartmouth could actually just say, okay, never mind. Your team is now like a club status. We're going to take away the official piece and we're just going to make you like these other hobby clubs, and we're going to just kind of shut the book on that. So it'll be very interesting to see how that happens. Okay, I have one more thing for you. So Constructive Dialogue Institute did a survey that talked about just trying to understand like how our students are thinking about things like conflict and civil dialogue. They found that 45% of students are afraid to express their opinions in the classroom out of fear of offending their peers, and almost half are afraid to share their views on social media. So here are some ways that schools are addressing that. Holland University, which we have the pleasure to serve, it's a great school. They're always doing really innovative things. They have a January term course called Conflict and Collaboration, which is a general education requirement where they are teaching students how to engage in constructive dialogue with others to talk about, here's my viewpoint, what's your viewpoint, which I love.
That's great.
It reminds me of my conversation with Michael a couple of weeks ago, where he was like, you just have to teach students how to live in community, right? Like we have to practice. Alma College has a common sense solution, which helps students engage across party lines to address political issues in a constructive manner. So we just have to learn how to be able to talk about those things. What I think is interesting coming out of this survey is that 94% of students agree that we should listen to others with an open mind, including those with whom we disagree. And 90% of students believe no matter how different we are, we can understand each other's experiences by listening and empathizing. So there's a weird disconnect there, right? Where they're afraid to offer their perspective, and at the same time seem to agree that we could all have good conversations and be able to really understand what's going on together.
It's encouraging, right? Like given I would just say the state of everything, how everything feels right now, it's very encouraging that you have college students today who say, like, I want to hear what other people say.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I'd like to be heard. So,
and I would say in particular, that is a place where our college campuses can do great work, right? I had dinner with some of our clients last week, and they were saying, we should expect that college students who are coming in as freshmen now, we just have to think of them as sophomores in high school because of the lapse, and stop being unhappy about it and stop being surprised about it. They just have not had all of the experiences they need to, and we've got to coach them up. And this piece of constructive dialogue, I think, is a really important place to get them coached up. So that is the State of the Union. Thanks for joining me once again, so I didn't have to talk to myself.
So you're kicking me out.
I am going to kick you out, and I'm going to invite our guest for this episode, Andrea Faber from Tiffin University. Andrea! Oh, you're on mute. Hi.
Oh, hi.
You were saying it's quiet around your campus because your students are on spring break.
It is. It's very quiet here this week. I'm really hoping students are enjoying Florida or something like that right now.
I know it. This is a good time to be gone. And spring break is weird because depending on where you are in the country, you have different, like here we have spring break next week. I think we have people who even have it later than that. So it's always hard to know exactly what's happening on campus.
Yeah.
All right. Will you introduce yourself? And then I have a lot of questions for you because I told you and I did a presentation a couple of months ago, and I was like, Andrew, you're such a superstar. You have to come on and tell everybody all of the work that you're doing. So will you introduce yourself, and then we'll get into my questions?
Sure. I'm Andrea Faber. I work at Tiffin University. I've worked here for a little over 19 years, went to school here too. And right now I'm the Dean of Retention and Persistence.
Awesome. So I don't know if you saw on LinkedIn, after we posted that I was going to have this conversation with you, Joretta Nelson, our friend from Credo, was so kind to be like, Andrea is amazing. She's done so much good work on our campus. And I want to talk a little bit about your work with Moving the Needle and some other things. But first of all, lest anyone think that I'm singing your praises for no good reason, let me give some statistics about your work with Dragon 360, which is what you guys have branded Fairs 360 on your campus. I don't know when the last time you looked at this data was. You're a data person, so you may have just looked at it, but let me tell you what I have. So since August, we're not looking at the work you did last year. Just since August, you've had 8,555 cases opened and closed in that amount of time, which is amazing. Because how many students are at Tiffin?
On campus, we have about 1,200 students.
Yeah. Wow. Right? Yeah. So if you think about how often those students have those touch points of like, how's it going? We see you. We want to be engaged with you. 8,000 cases. That's amazing. 1,078 hours logged, which I know is not an accurate reflection of all the work you're doing, but that is just what we have in the system. So that's incredible. Your 4-week surveys, so you're doing your stoplight surveys on your campus. And when I told Matt this, we were just so delighted because I love a good goal, right? I love when you're like, okay, we can do better. We can do better. Your 2022 survey, 95% completion from faculty. 95% of your faculty did what you asked them to do, which that is a win in and of itself. Right. 2023, 97%. And 2024, 98% of your faculty, you had 5,398 requests and 5,506 responses. Awesome job, Andrea.
Thank you.
I mean, good. And I know that is the result of a lot of really hard work.
Yes.
So I want to dive into that. The last thing I'll tell you is, do you know that since August, you've had 711 referrals? So that's student updates and referrals combined. You guys
I did not realize that. No.
You're like, that's why you're tired. Okay. So can we start with when you are a student, which you have had such a remarkable experience of being at the same place where you were a student and then having been there for 19 years at this point. What about your student experiences were the most impactful or memorable for you?
Well,
you are.
That's me and my best friend, Angie.
Awesome.
Actually, so this picture is from our first year seminar class. And one of the things we did was carve pumpkins and had like a contest of who could carve the best pumpkin with your group.
Yeah.
And although we didn't win first place, which I thought we should have, because, that's the dragon and that's our mascot.
That is an incredible pumpkin. When I thought, I was like, this is some skill.
Yeah. But that's from that class. So we got second place though.
Okay.
But one of the things that I remember is being in my math class, and I had a professor, Becky Fox was her name, and she noticed that one of the students in the class just kept missing class. And this was like early on in the fall semester. So I was new to college life, and she said, does this student live on campus? And we were like, oh yeah, he lives, in that residence hall. And she was like, okay, let's go. And we all stood up. We had to walk over to this residence hall, and we walking down the hallway, and then she knocked on the door, and the student opens the door, and she said, you've missed several classes here recently. It's time that you need to go to class and we're all missing you here. And so he came out to class, and we all walked back to class so that he wouldn't miss class.
Andrea, I would have died.
Yeah.
First of all, when I heard this story from you, I was like, the fact that he opened the door means he's an amateur, because you don't, right? Like you're not good at hiding. And then if somebody comes to your restaurant and you're like, hi, what's happening? I'm so torn about that story, because I'm like, I actually love the idea that your class would say, hey, our class is not as rich when you're not with us.
Mm-hmm.
I would die.
Yeah. And then that made me know, you know what, I'm never going to miss class again because I do not want anybody showing up in my dorm getting me out. So,
Well,
yeah.
you know, the kernel of that I really, really love that we talk about all the time is you do need to know that you're seen on campus. And when you're doing your stoplight surveys with those yellow lights where it's like, you're not in trouble, but you just need to know, like, we are paying attention to whether or not you're in class, to how well you're doing. And that would have made a huge difference for me as a student. I felt like nobody was paying attention to me. And so then, because I didn't have like intrinsic motivation to be successful, I was just like, okay, well, I guess I can just do whatever I want and no one's gonna come to my door and find me. So you also had a really great experience though with one of was it your business faculty who took you to tell me that story.
Yeah. So I had some really great management classes, and one of my faculty members decided, I want real world experience right up front. So we toured a lot of manufacturing firms, and he kind of built a relationship with those manufacturers, and asked them for kind of a case studies like, hey, what's going on in your world that needs fixed, or what solutions do you need, and things like that. So we read through different issues and what's going on in these companies. And we had to then figure out the solutions or the processes or operations and supply chain through different things, and then present it back to those companies. And we give them different options. Like, here's options A through B or A through F.
Yeah.
You choose what you want to do that best fits your company. And I just thought that was really great and real world experience. And I think that's what caused me to really be a solution-based mind.
Yeah.
Like, I'm constantly looking for solutions. Like, I never want to say that's an issue and not come with a solution.
Same. That is a thing that makes me crazy when it's like, yeah, sorry, that's just the way it is. And it's just going to be broken. And I'm like, I think maybe we could probably do something about that. Right. Yeah. I also really love that story because we have been talking so much just in the industry about the need to have real world applications of what we're talking about in our classes. And, we have some students who the lecture is never going to work for them. But the application of going to a place and having somebody say, remember how we talked about this thing? Okay, now we're going to apply it here and you're actually going to see how that works. That makes the college experience just so much more tangible and like, oh, I understand now why I'm doing these things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah, for sure. You also said something about in our kind of pre-interview about how important it is for faculty to know your name, which I think is so interesting because I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to people about their college experience. And it was something as simple as a faculty member calling them by name where they were like, oh, I guess I belong here, or I guess this is the place for me. Do you have any like specific people who inspired you in that way that just said to you basically like, hey, you're in the right place and this is what you should be doing?
It again was really my first year. I had a faculty member, like, I guess, she was trying to memorize everybody's names, but then even when she introduced herself, she wanted to make sure that we knew her name and we called her by her first name, and that was okay because she wanted to build that relationship with you. But even, I had her later in life in a grad school program, and she still remembered my name. So I just thought that, that connection from my first year, into a different program, that means a lot. And
for sure,
somebody who cared.
And having those symbols, right, that she's teaching you something about the culture and about her and about your importance early in your college career so that then you're set up to be successful. I really love that. Okay, so I want to talk about your current job because you kind of, I think it's super interesting the way that you have come to this current position. So tell me if you can remember them all.
Right.
You did you start in admissions?
Yeah. So I started out in undergrad admissions. I actually started out as a student worker. I worked the switchboard and the front desk and managing all the paperwork that came in. And when I graduated from college, became an admissions counselor and was on the road traveling and going to high schools and meeting high school guidance counselors. And then kind of moved to an online program that we had. And then at the time, they were really talks about retention and student services and making that better. So I asked to kind of move into that role. So that was like kind of our first retention job here at the university. And then that kind of led into financial aid because, kind of retention is a lot of money. And we didn't have a director of financial aid at the time. So I actually went to my boss and said, hey, I'd like to be the director of financial aid.
We need one
and
of those.
I will kind of do this kind of retention thing on the side with it. And so my majority of my time has been in financial aid, 11 years. So I thought I'd be a lifer, but 11 years is a lot of time. And then came into this role.
So before you did financial aid, when you were doing retention, who did you report to?
I reported to the vice president of enrollment management.
Okay. So then you did financial aid, and then this position now with retention, who do you report to?
To the provost.
To the provost.
Yep.
So Andrea, I would really love to hear your insight on this because it is such an interesting conversation to me. If you think about the structure of our organizations, and every school is a little bit different. And we have some schools that retention is under enrollment management, which makes sense to me, right? It's like the life cycle of the student. And then we have some schools where retention is under academics. And then we have some schools where retention is under student affairs and student development. And then some schools have the director of retention who reports directly to the president because it's just a mixture of all of those different things. And you have to have kind of the teeth to be able to say, here's what we want to do. So having reported in different places and been in charge of retention, what is your reflection on kind of the structure of that?
I really enjoy reporting to the provost because I feel like I have more of an autonomy to go from academics to enrollment to athletics. I move about. I always feel like I'm on this like roller coaster, just going back and forth between everybody's offices.
Yeah.
I think when I was just under enrollment management, if I stepped outside the lines a little bit, people, kind of looked at me like, what are you doing? You're in my silo.
Where you go. Yeah.
On my side. So it is a little bit more of a roller coaster back and forth, less kind of a silo feel. So yeah.
And a really big part of what you do, since you're not in charge of everybody on campus, right? A really big part of what you have to do is the negotiation and the social capital and all of that. Can you talk about how you navigate that on campus?
So, at first I tread lightly. You got to get to know these people, but because I've worked here for so long, I know a lot of people here. So it was just really getting to know everybody, letting them know what our goal was. And it's actually been, I think a big stem from our president, the initiatives like, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. This is how Andrea is going to be asking you questions. So even from the beginning, I think that's what set the tone of all of this.
For sure.
But it's been fairly easy to navigate. You just got to take a dive and, keep going. It's not treading water.
Yeah, for sure. Two things that you said I think are so important is I really do think that you have to have the president saying, listen, Andrea is my person. She's doing what I've asked her to do. And so I need cooperation on that. I think it's so important because it is so much about people in different silos. Like, hey, why are you asking me that? Right? Like you don't have authority to make me do that thing. But also I think you're so right in the advantage that you've have for having been there for so long. Right? Because we always talk about like you have to have the historical knowledge to know why we're doing it the way we're doing it now if you want to change it. It's really hard to step in and just be like, no, we're going to do this instead of being like, I know the iterations of how we got here and we maybe could do it better, but but I understand that context.
Yeah, I
Right?
definitely think it'd be difficult if I was brand new to the university and didn't know the ins and outs and the people and the systems. You know, anybody from the outside in the community, whenever I get questions about anything, it's like I already know who they should be talking to, things like that.
That's
So
exactly right. So I'm curious with your experience in financial aid, because I actually think that that is an experience that oftentimes people in charge of retention don't have expertise in that, right? And it's
Yeah.
sort of like a black box. And I don't want to stereotype, but sometimes financial aid or business office is not connected to the sort of retention efforts in terms of we want the student to feel seen, we want them to feel heard, we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to support them. It oftentimes can be like just go get your financial aid and then come back and we'll try to solve these problems. So how does your expertise or your experience there in financial aid, and I think admissions as well, right? Because you have experience telling the story of what students are going to go through when they come to your campus. How do those things inform your retention work?
Definitely financial aid is a big part of it. You know, monies and costs are everybody's issues, right? And everybody that's their forefront of their mind. So I just knowing that if I can clear the way that they don't have a balance, it made it easier for students you got to know how to talk to them a certain way about finances and their parents. I think that was really helpful in this because, you know, you're kind of like that in between counselor, right? You're not you're not an admissions counselor and you're not financial aid, but this retention role, you kind of are this counselor and to try to get them to the next level. And even like an academic advisor, you're similar to that, but you know the financial aid piece too. So it has definitely helped me feel like I have a branch in all areas. Like, you know, you need help in admissions information and transcripts and that, and, you know, academic advising. But I think financial aid is a huge part because you need to know money. You need to know how much they're getting. And I also just personally with this role, I've done a lot of, you know, break even points. You know, you might use a lot of maybe some institutional aid to help retain a student. Well, you can't just go out and think, I'm going to give them $2,000. Well, it may take only $1,000 to keep them because you're giving them a lot of other institutional aid. So you got to know kind of break even points for each student and discount rate. And I'm always keeping track of how much are we discounting students and things like that. So
yeah, it's really interesting, Andrea, because I think I think people get squeamish about the financial part of our work because we don't want to treat our students as our like we don't want to say, oh, well, we want the student to stay because we're tuition driven and we need them to stay in order to be successful, right? And I think anybody who works at the kinds of schools that we serve and a school like Tiffin, that's not the end of the day mentality. We really are trying to help them to be successful. But I think people get squeamish about it. And so they actually just ignore it or avoid it altogether because they don't have the fluency of what does it take for the student to be successful and for our institution to be able to be successful.
right.
So I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No.
Do you find that with financial aid stuff? It's just like there are some people who are like, I don't want to talk about it.
They'll always like reference, hey, our director, like, well, she'll be able to answer it for you. Or good thing we have this person here who knows about financial aid. They just, if it comes to money, they're just going to pass it because they don't want to make the wrong decision or answer on that.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because it is kind of like counseling, and that there are some people, like if you know about counseling, you've been trained in that, when a student's upset or they say something to you and you're like, hey, okay, let's unpack that and whatever. And then there are other people who are like, go talk to Rachel. Right? Like, I don't know how to have that conversation with you. We're going to outsource it to somebody who has a little bit more information about that. I think it's so important. I always say when I talk to financial aid counselors, like when we're talking to our students about money, it is so vulnerable. It is such a vulnerable position for them to be in because they're telling you about their family, about where they come from, about the struggles that they have, about the need that they have. A lot of times they're being very transparent about they don't have enough food or they can't afford that, to live in that place or those sorts of things. And the place where they're off balance, this is always true with our students, when they're really off balance, you have the ability to then be able to kind of speak truth to them, right? Because they're so open and so vulnerable. And I'm sure that you've had that experience many times with students.
Even with parents sometimes. And they want to hear it, and they're glad that you're honest with them too. So
yeah,
I've had those conversations with both.
Yeah, for sure. I really love that. So thinking about the tools that you have at your disposal when you're thinking about like, okay, we've got to find this amount of money for the student, or we've got to do this, those things, I don't think people always understand all of the tools that you have to be able to say, here's how we can help students, right? And I actually think it's one of the reasons people don't like talking about it, because they feel like, well, if a student can't pay for it, then they have to go home. Can you talk a little bit about the things that you have at your disposal in terms of how you help students with the financial piece?
Well, obviously filing the FAFSA.
Yeah.
We've talked to the university over several years, even when I first started this role long time ago before financial aid, having a kind of a pot of money as a retention source, which is really nice to have. Not that you have to use it at all, but it's there to help. I look at coaches and I talk to coaches, and I look at just kind of their financial aid package to know, is there a way to help them? That type of thing. So I look at all aspects. I even look at their grades. I look at what high school GPA they have coming in, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's so good because you're thinking about it in a complete package, right? So sometimes we have students who can't afford to stay with us, and we look at their involvement in our community and we're like, they probably don't need to be here, right? They're not actually a really good part of our community. But then also, go ahead.
The other thing that I look at for the last couple of years is the focus score with Ferris. So I look at their focus score, and depending on how they're ranked, that also lays a factor on there, whether we're going to help that student or what we can do to help that student.
Yeah. So focus score, just for those of you who don't know, we do a predictive model for freshmen, just being able to say like, hey, this is how, really, I think about it in terms of like, how many resources does this student need in order to be able to be successful here? And some students, they're like golden. They're not going to need a lot of resources, not just financial, but just in general, right? And then you have some students where you're like, wow, we've really got a lot of work to do to help them to kind of close the gap of that success. So I was going to say something else about that, but I don't know what it was. No, you're great. Okay, so I would like for you to talk to us for just a minute about FAFSA. What are you guys doing about this debacle?
Well, we're having a FAFSA night tomorrow for local high schools. I think that's important. We're making sure to reach out to all the high schools locally and said, hey, if you have students that need to file a FAFSA, we're here, we're open, we're going to have some late night and anybody can come and we'll help you file a FAFSA. So, awesome. I mean, ultimately at this point, that's what anybody needs to do. Like anybody needs to file a FAFSA, because if you didn't file and when the school gets the FAFSA, you want a package, right? So you're going to be late to get a package if you didn't file your FAFSA. So really,
your focus right now is like the best thing schools can be doing is just getting students to fill it out.
Yes. So current students and your recruiting students. We have a focus on our current students and our first years and just making sure everybody's filing. It's like, on our computer screens and text messaging and our newsletters and all that. So it's really a huge focus. Just file the FAFSA so that you're ready to go when these FAFSAs get to schools.
Yeah. So, and they're still saying sometime this month.
Yep. Mid-March.
We'll believe it when we see it.
Right.
Yeah. I've just been talking to so many schools that just feel like it is such a black box. It's just so hard when you think about admissions, you think about what your class is going to look like, your budget, like just all of that stuff is just so difficult without any kind of indication. And so it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out.
Yeah, it's very tough.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
really hurting the families and students really at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I have a couple of friends whose oldest are going to school next year as freshmen, and they're like, I just can't. How can we make a decision? Because we don't have any of the data that we need to be able to do that really well.
Right. Yeah.
Really difficult. Okay, so you are currently leading and managing the Moving the Needle project on campus. That is through Credo. So what has been the most, well, actually, let me talk about Moving the Needle for just a second. So this is like a 5-year partnership where you're really working to change the culture, to fix some things about the business of being a student, to make sure that we have our students registered and we have the right financial aid and all of those things. A huge part of your role in that project is organizing people, talking about here's what we're going to do, here are the strategies, and here's how we're going to move forward. So for you, what has been the most fulfilling part of that role?
I think the most fulfilling part so far has been the clearance process. I never thought we would get to where we are today in this clearance process. And what I mean by that is the business of being a student, right? Clearing the way so that obstacles, filling out paperwork and the money and the paying the bills is kind of all out of the way before students start classes. And we made a change this last year to kind of rip that Band-Aid and say, okay, students at TU, if your bill is not paid, you are going to be deregistered from classes. And so we stuck to it and worked really hard on the summer to try to get every student cleared, and it worked. So, we had less financial holds than we've ever had, and we were able to enroll at a great persistence rates that we've never had before.
Yeah.
And then we did the same process all over again for January 1 for spring semester. And so I'm really looking forward to this next year. But that's one of the biggest accomplishments so far. So
Andrea,
I never thought it would happen.
Yeah. What you guys did was so gutsy, because it is the conversation of like, we have students who have a balance. We don't want to lose them.
Right.
And at the same time, if they never pay their balance, we're not going to be successful with them, right? We're just always digging this hole. Yeah. And so for you guys to say like, no, we're going to be really serious about it, and it's going to set us up to then be super successful, has just been incredible. You've done such a great job.
We lost like around 20 students, from that process of our first years coming in, but we would have lost those students in the persistence side into retention for next fall anyway, because they weren't ready. They could not, pay.
Right.
So
it's just like kicking the can, right? When you just continue to let them hang on. And I was talking to Joretta about this process the other day, not at Tiffin, but just in general. And she was like, you'll have schools that have like $6 million in outstanding balances because students can't pay it. And you're not going to see that money. Students, if they can't pay it, they can't pay it. So all of the tools that you have at your disposal. And yet at some point you have to say, we want our students, we want to set them up to be successful. And I had a student years ago who, after the first semester of her freshman year, she had spent all of the money that she had. And I was just like, you can't be successful in this way. We have to either figure out a tool for you, or we've got to figure out someplace else for you to be, because this is just going to be, if not this semester and not the next semester and not this semester, eventually you're going to be in a place where you've spent money and you can't continue.
Right. Well, that brings up another thing. We're doing a student a disservice too, right? If they can't pay and then you come and accrue all this debt, how are you ever going to get on top? Because then if you leave the university and you go to collections, it hurts you over time. And that's not setting any person up for success.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You also have done a lot of work in individual students, not just on the financial aid side, but just thinking about, we are always talking about our student success funnel. How do we find students, connect with them, solve their problems, and then do our outcome measurements? And I think you particularly have a data brain. And so the work that you've done to work that funnel with your students in Dragon 360, and just to say, we're going to find them and we're going to give them to people who then are going to be able to connect with them and help solve that problem. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So with all the layers, so we have the Ferris Focus score. We know what their EFC is. We know we do the stoplight survey, and kind of with those ones that come in at red, on the stoplight survey, all these layers. And then we already kind of pinpointed some focus areas with certain teams that have a lower persistence and retention rate, and different areas on campus like that. And then after all these layers, those are the students we're really focusing on, just kind of with more outreach from the academic advisors. We have the peer or the faculty mentors that are 4 years now, and they're reaching out to students as well on top of their academic advisor. And we've even, gotten a lot of housing involved and RAs involved with that process, just really making those connections. So I think we have done a really good job on that part.
I think so too. I think it's really remarkable because so often on a campus, there can be like a hyper focus on identifying the students where it's like, we just have to do more analytics and we have to do more of this and more of this and more, right? And sometimes for those campuses, we have to be like, hey, stop. Like, you have a lot of information that could help you identify the students that struggle.
Right.
And then sometimes we have schools that like have really, really good connection and solve, like we have all the people and they want to be connected to all the students, but they're not doing a good job of focusing those resources on the right students because they're not looking at the identification piece.
Right.
And so the pipeline of here's everything we know to be true about a student, here's our most at-risk population, and then how do we leverage those existing relationships to really connect with them and make sure that they feel seen and that we can solve very pragmatic problems like, how are you going to pay for this? Do you have your health forum, right? Are you ready the first day to be able to be successful? You guys have just done such a great job on that.
Yeah, I commend everybody here. Everybody's kind of on board with this, so it's been really nice for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. I do think, and thinking about the clearance work you've done and then the work with Dragon 360 and Focus and all of that, in terms of doing your students a service, I really love the idea that on the first day of class, when a student comes to class, that their brain is not clouded with all of the stuff they have to do, right? Like, oh, and also I have to fill out the form and how am I going to pay for it? And I've got all this stuff, but actually that they show up in class eager to learn and to be fully engaged with that.
Yeah.
And so although it is so hard to move all of that work before the first day of class, I just think it puts our students in a much better headspace to be able to be successful.
Well, we've also noticed that with the stoplight survey, we've had less coded reds. Our midterm grades last fall were better. We had less D's and F's overall with all students. So I think that comes with it. If you're taking one burden off that, I'm not having a financial issue, or guess what? don't have to turn in all this paperwork, that they're just here to be a student and learn, and that taking that burden off of them.
I love that also because it depends on your experience and your professionalism in a process that they don't know. So when you can show up as a professional and say, trust me, if we get all of this done before class starts, then you're going to be in a much better place. They don't know it and their parents don't know it. And so a lot of times we just have to say, I know what I'm talking about. It's going to be better for us to do this thing, right?
Yes.
So I love that. All right. Well, we just have a few minutes left, but I'm really curious, as you think about the challenges for higher education, I feel like there's a lot of them going around. What is at the front of your mind as you're thinking about that issue?
Well, FAFSA has got to get here.
Yeah.
Even the gainful employment and the transparency rules that are going into place. I mean, that's like slamming schools and financial aid offices just like back to back.
Yeah.
With that, and that's a concern. Just even the concern that, a lot of students are deciding on going and doing trade schools and getting a trade, which is very important too, but there is importance in an education, and, we need We need other people like CFOs and accountants and things like that too. So I think that's a thing to consider down the line, is how many people are going into these trades.
Yeah, I think for so long we've had it a little bit easy in terms of we haven't had to articulate perfectly the value proposition that we provide, because everybody just kind of understood it. And I think for sure we're in a place now where we've got to shore up what we are telling students we're providing for them, because it isn't just like, oh, we're preparing you for a job, right? There is a lot of other benefits for a young adult to be on campuses that support them and that are like, as their brain is progressing, right? As their brain is growing, giving them that kind of support. And so I think there's a lot of articulation that we have to do about the value that we're providing to our students.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I didn't say to you guys that Andrea was our 2023 Ferris Lighthouse Award winner as our student success professional because of all of the great work that she has done on her campus and for her students. So thrilled for our listeners to be able to get to hear from your expertise. And I just appreciate you taking time out of your spring break week, although I know you're working, to come and spend time with us. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Rachel. And
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.